They say hindsight is 20/20. Looking back, the signs were always there. Little things that didn't seem to matter much at first. Olivia's late nights at work, her sudden obsession with her appearance, and the way she kept her phone face down on the counter as though hiding something. At the time, I convinced myself it was nothing. 8 years of marriage can blur your perspective. You want to believe the best in the person you chose to spend your life with, even when that gnawing voice in the back of your mind tells you otherwise. But the voice grew louder. She started coming home later than usual, the smell of an unfamiliar cologne clinging to her clothes. She laughed more at her phone than she ever did at my jokes, and her responses to my questions became curt, as though the mere act of answering annoyed her. Still, I told myself it was stress, or maybe a rough patch. Every marriage has them, right? Then came the night I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. I had called Olivia earlier that day, asking if she wanted to grab dinner after work. She had sighed, loudly, and said, "I have a meeting tonight. It's going to run late." There was a time when her tone carried love, warmth. That time was long gone. Something about the way she brushed me off didn't sit right. So, I did something I never thought I'd do. I got in my car and drove to the restaurant near her office, the one she claimed was her meeting spot. But when I got there, it was closed. A handwritten sign taped to the door read, "Renovating. Back in 2 weeks." I sat in the car for a long time, staring at that sign. The pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to solve clicking into place. I shouldn't have gone any further. I should have gone home, swallowed my suspicions, and buried myself in denial. But something inside me wouldn't let me walk away. That's how I ended up outside the Radley Hotel, a place I knew only by reputation. It wasn't a place for tourists or business travelers. It was a place for secrets. I parked across the street and waited. It didn't take long. The door to room 214 opened, and there she was, Olivia, laughing as she stepped out. Another man followed her. A man I didn't recognize but hated immediately. He placed his hand on the small of her back, and she leaned into him, her laughter soft but unmistakable. I sat frozen in the car, watching as the two of them disappeared down the hall. Part of me wanted to storm in, to demand answers, to confront her right then and there. But I didn't. I stayed in the car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Bursting in wouldn't have changed anything. The betrayal had already happened. I drove home in silence that night, the weight of her laughter ringing in my ears. The betrayal wasn't just about her infidelity. It was about the life we had built together, the trust one had given her, crumbling into nothing. Sitting in the dark of our living room, I stared at the wedding photo on the mantel. I remembered the promises we had made, the love we once shared. But the person in that photo wasn't the woman who had walked into that hotel room. That person was gone. I knew then that my marriage was over. But instead of wallowing in despair, something shifted inside me. Olivia thought she had the upper hand, that her lies and deceit would go unnoticed, that I'd stay the oblivious husband. She had underestimated me. The betrayal didn't just mark the end of our marriage. It marked the beginning of something else, my resolve to take back control of my life. I wasn't going to confront her, not yet. Confrontation would come later, on my terms. For now, I had to be smart. I had to think, to plan, to prepare. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the start of a new chapter, one where I would reclaim the dignity Olivia tried to strip from me. The morning after that night outside the Radley Hotel, I woke up to the smell of freshly brewed coffee and Olivia humming softly in the kitchen. It was almost cruel how normal she seemed, as though she hadn't shattered my trust the night before. "Morning," she said with a smile, handing me a cup. I took it without a word, studying her face for any trace of guilt. There was none. She was either an incredible liar, or she had convinced herself that what she was doing wasn't wrong. Either way, I knew I needed proof before I could make my next move. That's when I called Alan. Alan and I had met years ago when I was negotiating contracts for a major client. He was a private investigator, one of the best in the business. If anyone could confirm what I already knew in my gut, it was him. "Marcus," Alan said when he picked up, his voice warm but professional. "It's been a while. What can I do for you?" "I need answers, Alan," I said, "and I need them fast." I explained the situation, sparing no detail. Alan didn't ask unnecessary questions or offer unsolicited advice. He simply said, "Send me her schedule, the places she frequents, and any names you think might be involved. I'll handle the rest." Over the next week, I kept up the charade of the oblivious husband while Alan worked in the background. Olivia had no idea that every step she took, every whispered conversation, was being monitored. When Alan finally called with his findings, I wasn't ready for what he had to say. "I've got everything you need," he said, his tone grim. "Photos, videos, and some rather damning audio recordings. Do you want the highlights, or should I send the full report?" "Start with the highlights," I said, bracing myself. He started with the photos, Olivia and a man named Tyler, meeting at motels and restaurants. The pictures showed them holding hands, laughing, sharing intimate moments. "She's been seeing him for months," Alan continued. "It's not just physical, Marcus. There's a pattern here, a connection." As painful as it was to hear, the worst part came next. "Here's where it gets complicated," Alan said. "Tyler thinks you're the bad guy in this story. Olivia's been feeding him lies, telling him you're controlling and abusive. He seems to genuinely believe she's some sort of victim trying to escape you." I felt a surge of anger unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't enough that she had betrayed me. She had turned me into a villain in someone else's story, warping the truth to justify her actions. "Do you have proof of this?" I asked, my voice tight. Alan sighed. "I do. There's a recorded conversation where she explicitly says you're emotionally suffocating her, and that she needs Tyler to help her break free." I sat in silence, letting his words sink in. Every fiber of my being wanted to confront her right then and there, to demand an explanation for her lies and deceit. But I knew better. "Send me everything," I said finally. "The photos, the recordings, all of it. I'll need this for what comes next." Alan agreed, and within the hour, I had the full report in my inbox. As I sifted through the evidence, I felt a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, disbelief. How had it come to this? How had the woman I married turned into a stranger capable of such cruelty? But amidst the storm of emotions, one thing became clear. I couldn't let this break me. I spent the rest of the evening organizing the evidence, cataloging every detail for the inevitable confrontation. But I wasn't just preparing for a fight. I was preparing to protect myself. The next day, I met with my lawyer, Nathan, who had been a trusted advisor for years. I laid everything out for him, from my suspicions to Alan's findings. Nathan leaned back in his chair, his expression serious. "This is more than enough for a solid divorce case," he said. "With this evidence, you'll be in a strong position to protect your assets and your reputation." "That's the plan," I said. "But Marcus," Nathan added, his tone cautious, "are you sure you're ready for this? Once you confront her, there's no turning back." I nodded. "I've been ready since the night I saw her walk into that hotel." As I left Nathan's office, I felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't consumed by doubt or confusion. I knew the truth, and I had the tools to act on it. Olivia thought she had control of the narrative, that her lies would go unchecked. She was wrong. The storm was coming, and I was ready to face it head-on. In the weeks that followed Alan's report, I felt like a man living two lives. On the surface, I was the same Marcus, attentive husband, thoughtful partner, and hard worker. But beneath the facade, I was a man preparing for the end of a chapter, the dismantling of a life I once believed in. Each morning, Olivia carried on as if nothing had changed, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. She smiled at me over breakfast, texted me during the day, and still played the role of the devoted wife. But I knew better. I spent those days meticulously preparing, piece by piece, for the inevitable confrontation. The first step was financial. I transferred every dollar from our joint account into a personal one, ensuring Olivia couldn't touch a cent without me knowing. Credit cards tied to our shared finances were canceled, and I froze any accounts she might try to exploit once the truth came out. Nathan, my lawyer, helped me make the moves quietly and efficiently. He even filed for divorce under a pseudonym, ensuring Olivia wouldn't be tipped off until I was ready to serve her the papers. "Don't leave any loose ends," Nathan reminded me during one of our late-night meetings. I took his advice to heart. I scanned through every shared document, every receipt, every detail of our lives together, looking for anything Olivia might use against me. While I worked to protect myself financially, I also focused on maintaining the illusion of normalcy. It wasn't easy. Acting as though nothing was wrong while knowing the truth took every ounce of restraint I had. I even went as far as organizing date nights, a painful but necessary tactic to keep Olivia unsuspecting. We'd sit at a candlelit table, her laughter ringing hollow in my ears as I wondered how many lies she had told Tyler about these moments. "Are you okay?" she asked one evening, her eyes searching my face. "You seem off lately." I forced a smile, shaking my head. "Just work stress. Nothing to worry about." She nodded, seemingly satisfied with my answer. If she had any inkling of what was coming, she didn't show it. At night, after she had fallen asleep, I would retreat to my office, poring over the evidence Alan had gathered. The photos, the recordings, the transcripts of her conversations with Tyler. They were all pieces of a puzzle I was slowly assembling. I kept them in a locked drawer, along with the divorce papers Nathan had prepared. Every so often, I'd take them out, reminding myself of why I was doing this. The emotional toll was heavier than I had anticipated. There were nights when I sat in the dark, staring at the wedding photo on my desk, questioning everything. How had it come to this? Had there been a moment when I could have stopped it, a point of no return I had missed? But every time doubt crept in, I reminded myself of the truth. Olivia had made her choices. She had lied, cheated, and manipulated. Whatever consequences she faced were the result of her own actions, not mine. One evening, as I sat on the porch with a glass of bourbon, Nathan called. "Are you ready to go through with this?" he asked. "Yes," I said without hesitation. "You've done everything you can to protect yourself," he said. "Now it's just about timing." I hung up the phone and stared out at the horizon. The sun was setting, casting the sky in shades of orange and gold. It was the calm before the storm, the last moment of peace before everything changed. The next day, I finalized the arrangements. The evidence was organized and ready to present. The divorce papers were signed and sealed, waiting to be delivered. The house, the finances, and my future were secured. All that was left was the confrontation. As I watched Olivia that evening, laughing at some joke on her phone, I felt a strange sense of clarity. This was the woman who had betrayed me, lied to me, and plotted against me. But she was also the woman I had once loved, the person I had built a life with. Tomorrow, that life would end. And for the first time in weeks, I felt at peace with that. The day had finally arrived. Every detail, every contingency, every ounce of preparation I'd poured into this moment was about to pay off. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't angry. I was calm, eerily so. I think I'd spent so much time imagining this confrontation that my emotions had burned themselves out. I waited until Olivia got home from work. She walked through the door, her face lighting up with the kind of smile I hadn't seen in years. "Hey, how was your day?" she asked, her voice cheerful. I smiled back, though mine was practiced. "Busy," I replied, "but productive." She didn't notice the subtle change in my tone, the edge buried just beneath the surface. After dinner, I suggested we sit in the living room for a bit. Olivia agreed, settling into her usual spot on the couch with a glass of wine. I stayed standing, pacing slowly as I considered how to begin. "There's something I need to talk to you about," I said finally, keeping my voice even. Olivia froze for a fraction of a second, her wine glass pausing halfway to her lips. But she recovered quickly, her smile widening as she tried to maintain her usual demeanor. "Oh, what's on your mind?" I turned to face her, locking eyes. "I know about Tyler." Her smile faltered, her fingers tightening around the glass. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the affair," I said, my tone cold and measured. "The hotel rooms, the late-night phone calls, the lies. I know everything, Olivia." Her face went pale, the color draining as though I'd slapped her. "Marcus, that's ridiculous. I don't know where you're getting this from, but—" I cut her off by reaching into the drawer of the side table and pulling out the folder. Inside was everything Alan had gathered. Photos of her with Tyler, transcripts of their conversations, and financial records tying her to motel stays and expensive gifts. I dropped the folder onto the coffee table in front of her. The sound echoed in the silence. "Go ahead," I said. "Take a look." For a moment, she didn't move. Then, with trembling hands, she opened the folder and began flipping through the pages. Her eyes widened as she took in the evidence, her breathing growing faster with each passing second. This isn't what it looks like," she stammered. "I can explain." "Don't," I said sharply. "Don't insult me by pretending this is anything other than what it is." She looked up at me, tears pooling in her eyes. "Marcus, I'm sorry. I made a mistake, but—" "A mistake?" I interrupted, my voice rising slightly. "A mistake is forgetting our anniversary or saying something you don't mean in an argument. This wasn't a mistake, Olivia. This was a choice. Over and over again, you chose to lie to me, betray me, and destroy what we built together." Her tears spilled over, her voice breaking as she tried to defend herself. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I felt so alone, Marcus. You were always so busy, so distant." "Don't you dare blame this on me," I snapped, my composure slipping for the first time. "I worked hard to give us a good life, to provide for us. And while I was doing that, you were sneaking around behind my back." She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. "I didn't know how to tell you," she said, her voice muffled. "You didn't know how to tell me?" I repeated, laughing bitterly. "That's rich. You had no problem telling Tyler all about how controlling and abusive I supposedly was. Did you think I wouldn't find out about that, too?" Her head shot up, her tear-streaked face filled with panic. "Marcus, I didn't mean that. I was trying to justify—" "Save it," I said, cutting her off again. "I'm done listening to your excuses. I've already spoken to my lawyer. The divorce papers are ready, and I'll be filing them tomorrow." Her sobs grew louder, her words jumbled as she begged me to reconsider. "Marcus, please. We can work through this. I love you." "Stop," I said, my voice firm and unyielding. "If you loved me, you wouldn't have done this. Actions have consequences, Olivia. Yours just caught up to you." I turned and walked toward the door, grabbing the bag I had packed earlier. As I opened the door, I paused, glancing back at her one last time. "You wanted out of this marriage, Olivia," I said. "Well, congratulations. You got your wish." And with that, I walked out, leaving her sobbing on the couch, alone with the weight of her choices. As I drove away, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, sadness, relief. But above all, I felt free. Walking away from Olivia that night felt like shedding a heavy, suffocating skin. For years, I'd carried the weight of our marriage, the fights, the lies, the betrayal. But as I drove toward the new chapter of my life, I felt that burden start to lift. I moved into a smaller house on the outskirts of the city, one far removed from the memories that had filled the walls of our marital home. It wasn't much, a modest two-bedroom with just enough space for me to start over. But it was mine. The first thing I did was change my phone number. Olivia had bombarded me with calls and texts in the days following our confrontation, alternating between desperate pleas and angry accusations. "We can fix this, Marcus," one message would say, followed by another reading, "You're throwing everything away." I ignored every single one. The divorce process began swiftly. Nathan filed the papers as planned, using the mountain of evidence I had collected to ensure the settlement was entirely in my favor. Olivia, caught between her guilt and her dwindling resources, didn't have much room to argue. One day, as I was unpacking boxes in my new home, Nathan called with an update. "She's already signed the papers," he said. "With the evidence we have, her lawyer likely told her it wasn't worth fighting." I leaned against the kitchen counter, letting the words sink in. "So, it's over?" "Not quite," Nathan replied. "There's still the matter of the marital home and joint assets, but based on her current situation, it's unlikely she'll contest any of it." He was right. By the time the settlement was finalized, I had retained the house, my savings, and nearly everything else of value. Olivia had walked away with little more than her clothes and a fraction of what she'd hoped to gain. Her downfall didn't end there. Word of our divorce and the reasons behind it began to spread through our social circle. Mutual friends who had once admired Olivia for her charm and wit now saw her in a different light. Invitations to dinners and events stopped coming, and her once thriving social life crumbled. I heard through the grapevine that Tyler, the man she had risked everything for, had ended things shortly after our confrontation. Apparently, he wasn't interested in being with a woman whose lies had been so thoroughly exposed. Without financial support or a place to stay, Olivia was forced to move in with her parents. It was a fitting end for someone who had spent years building an image of success and independence. Now, she was back in her childhood bedroom, facing the consequences of her choices. For me, the days that followed were quieter than I had expected. The house was peaceful, free from the tension and deceit that had consumed my life for so long. I spent my evenings unpacking, decorating, and rediscovering the simple joys I had forgotten amidst the chaos. One night, as I sat on the back porch of my new home, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. The anger and betrayal were still there, lingering like faint scars, but they no longer defined me. I thought about Olivia, not with longing or regret, but with a sense of finality. She had made her choices, and I had made mine. The life we had built together was over, and while it hurt to admit that, it was also freeing. This new chapter wasn't just about leaving her behind. It was about reclaiming myself, rediscovering who I was outside of that marriage. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight streaming through the windows. For the first time in years, I felt truly rested. As I turned the key in the lock of my new home, stepping outside to greet the day, I realized something. I wasn't just starting over. I was moving forward. The first few weeks in my new home felt like uncharted territory. It was quiet, almost too quiet, but that silence held a strange kind of peace. No more late-night arguments, no hidden glances, no lingering tension. Just me, my thoughts, and the slow realization that I had survived the worst of it. As I began to settle in, I reached out to an old friend, Claire. We hadn't spoken much in recent years, but she had always been someone I could rely on, a grounding presence in a world that often felt chaotic. I sent her a simple message, "Hey, it's been a while. Want to catch up?" Her reply came almost immediately. "Absolutely. Name the time and place." We met at a small cafe downtown, a cozy spot tucked away from the noise of the city. When she walked in, her warm smile reminded me of why I had always valued her friendship. "Marcus," she said, pulling me into a hug. "It's so good to see you." We talked for hours, catching up on everything we had missed in each other's lives. I told her about the divorce. Not all the gory details, but enough for her to understand the betrayal I had endured. She listened without judgment, her expression soft with understanding. "I'm sorry you went through that," she said when I finished, "but I'm glad you're starting fresh. You deserve better." Her words lingered with me long after our meeting. Claire became a regular part of my life in the weeks that followed. She'd stop by with homemade meals, insisting that I couldn't live off takeout and frozen dinners forever. At first, I thought she was just being polite, but the gestures felt genuine, heartfelt. One evening, as we sat on my back porch watching the sunset, she turned to me with a question. "Do you ever think about what's next?" she asked. I hesitated, unsure how to answer. For so long, my focus had been on surviving, getting through the divorce, rebuilding my life. I hadn't allowed myself to think about the future beyond the day-to-day. "I don't know," I admitted. "I'm still figuring that out." She smiled softly, her hand resting on mine. "That's okay. Sometimes it's enough just to take it one step at a time." Her words stuck with me. Claire had a way of making everything feel less overwhelming, less complicated. It wasn't long before I realized that her presence had become a source of comfort, a light in what had been a very dark time. One day, she invited me to join her at a charity event she was organizing, a book drive for underprivileged kids. At first, I was hesitant. Social events hadn't exactly been my thing since the divorce, but Claire's enthusiasm was infectious. The event turned out to be exactly what I needed. Watching her interact with the kids, her warmth and kindness on full display, I couldn't help but feel drawn to her. She wasn't just a friend anymore. She was someone who made me want to believe in the possibility of love again. As our friendship deepened, I began to open up more. I told her about the moments of doubt, the nights when I questioned if I had made the right decisions. She listened patiently, never offering empty platitudes or trying to fix things. She simply let me be. Slowly but surely, I started to let my guard down. One evening, after dinner at her place, I found myself lingering longer than usual. As I helped her clear the table, she turned to me, her expression serious but gentle. "You've been through a lot, Marcus," she said. "But I hope you know you don't have to go through it alone." "I know," I said, meeting her gaze. "And I'm starting to realize that I don't want to." It was a simple exchange, but it felt like a turning point. Claire wasn't just helping me heal. She was helping me rediscover parts of myself I thought I had lost. Her kindness, her patience, her unwavering support. They reminded me that life after betrayal didn't have to be defined by pain. There were still moments of hesitation, walls I hadn't fully let down. But with Claire, I didn't feel rushed or pressured. She gave me the space I needed to move forward at my own pace, and for that, I was grateful. By the time I returned home that night, I realized something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope for the future. Hope for happiness. Hope for the kind of connection I thought I'd never find again. Life had begun to stabilize. My days were spent restoring furniture and finding solace in quiet moments with Claire. It was a routine that felt both comforting and fulfilling, a far cry from the chaos Olivia had brought into my life. Then, one Saturday afternoon, as I was sanding down an old dining table in my workshop, there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, but when I opened the door, I froze. Standing there, looking awkward and uncomfortable, was Tyler. "Marcus," he said, his voice hesitant. "Can we talk?" It took everything in me to not slam the door in his face. Tyler, the man who had been at the center of my marriage's collapse, the man Olivia had chosen over me, was now standing on my doorstep, looking like a lost puppy. "I don't think we have anything to say to each other," I said, my voice cold. "Please," he said, holding up his hands in a gesture of surrender. "I know I'm the last person you want to see, but I need to apologize." I hesitated, torn between slamming the door and hearing him out. Finally, I stepped aside, gesturing for him to come in. Tyler entered the workshop, his eyes darting around as though he were trying to take in every detail of the space. He stood awkwardly near the door, clearly unsure of what to say next. "Well?" I prompted, crossing my arms. He took a deep breath, his shoulders sagging. "I didn't know," he said. "About you. About what Olivia was really like." I raised an eyebrow. "What exactly didn't you know, Tyler? That she was married? That she was lying to you?" "She told me you were abusive," he said quickly, his words tumbling over each other. "She said you controlled her, that you made her feel trapped." I believed her because I didn't have any reason not to. But now I know the truth. "And what brought about this sudden revelation?" I asked, my tone dripping with sarcasm. Tyler sighed, running a hand through his hair. "She's not who I thought she was. After everything came out, the divorce, the lies, I started to see the cracks. She's been lying to everyone, not just me. And when she started accusing me of things I hadn't done, I realized how much of a fool I've been." For a moment, I said nothing, letting his words hang in the air. Part of me wanted to revel in the satisfaction of seeing him squirm, but another part of me couldn't ignore the genuine regret in his voice. "So why are you here?" I asked finally. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope, holding it out to me. "I found this in her things," he said. "It's yours." I took the envelope, opening it carefully. Inside was a lottery ticket, a winning one. The date on it was from a year ago, months before everything fell apart. "She told me you didn't need the money," Tyler said, "that she'd put it aside for something important. But now I realize she was keeping it from you." I stared at the ticket, my mind racing. It wasn't just the money that mattered. It was the principle. Olivia had taken something that was rightfully mine and hidden it. Just another layer of her betrayal. "Why are you giving this to me?" I asked, looking up at Tyler. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply. I know I can't undo what happened, but I want to at least try to make things right. I studied him for a moment, searching for any sign of ulterior motives. But all I saw was a man who looked genuinely ashamed of his actions. Thank you, I said finally, slipping the ticket into my pocket. Tyler nodded, a flicker of relief crossing his face. I'm sorry, Marcus, for everything. I let myself get caught up in something I didn't fully understand, and you didn't deserve any of it. I didn't respond right away. Forgiveness wasn't something I could offer easily, not after everything he and Olivia had done. But his gesture, however small, felt like a step toward closure. As Tyler turned to leave, he paused at the door. For what it's worth, he said, I hope you find happiness again. You deserve it. I watched him walk away, his shoulders hunched as though the weight of his choices were finally catching up to him. Later that evening, as I sat with Claire, I told her about Tyler's visit. She listened quietly, her hand resting on mine. How do you feel about it? She asked. I'm not sure, I admitted. It doesn't change what happened, but I guess it's a start. She smiled gently. Sometimes, closure doesn't come in the way we expect. Maybe this is a step toward letting go. As I held the lottery ticket in my hand, I realized she was right. Tyler's gesture wasn't just about the money. It was about the chance to truly move forward. And for the first time, I felt like I could. It didn't take long for Olivia's carefully curated life to fall apart. After the divorce was finalized, her new reality began to sink in. The lavish home, the financial security, and the social circle she had once flaunted were gone. She had traded a stable life for fleeting excitement, and now she had nothing to show for it. I heard the updates through mutual acquaintances, though I didn't ask for them. It was hard to avoid the whispers. Olivia was forced to move back in with her parents, a fact that drew no small amount of judgment from her family and friends. The once proud woman who had prided herself on her independence now slept in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by relics of a life she had long outgrown. Her parents, I was told, weren't exactly sympathetic. They had been furious when they learned the full extent of her betrayal. The shame she brought to the family name, coupled with her inability to take responsibility, created a rift between them. They offered her a place to stay, but little else in terms of support. Her social life suffered just as much. Friends who had once admired her charisma and confidence began distancing themselves. Some couldn't condone her actions, while others simply found her drama exhausting. Invitations to parties and gatherings dried up, leaving her isolated in a way she had likely never experienced before. One day, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable. It was from Olivia. I hesitated before opening it, unsure if I even wanted to read what she had to say. But curiosity got the better of me, and I unfolded the letter. Marcus, it began. I don't even know where to start. I know you have no reason to read this, let alone believe anything I say, but I need to say it anyway. I'm sorry. For everything. For betraying you. For lying to you. For destroying what we had. At the time, I told myself I wasn't happy, that I deserved more. But looking back now, I see how wrong I was. You were a good husband, better than I ever deserved, and I threw it all away for nothing. I've lost everything now. The house, the friends, even Tyler. He left as soon as things got difficult, and I can't blame him. I wouldn't want to stick around for this mess either. I know I can never undo the pain I caused you, but I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me someday. Not for me, but for yourself. You deserve peace, Marcus. You always did. Olivia. I stared at the letter for a long time, rereading her words and searching for sincerity. There was a part of me that felt vindicated, knowing she finally understood the consequences of her actions. But another part of me felt nothing at all. The truth was, I didn't need her apology. It wouldn't change what had happened, and it wouldn't erase the scars she had left behind. That evening, I placed the letter in a drawer and walked out to the porch, where Claire was waiting. She looked up from her book, sensing something on my mind. Everything okay? She asked. I nodded, sitting beside her and taking her hand. I got a letter from Olivia, I said. Claire's brow furrowed slightly. What did she say? She apologized, I replied. Said she regrets everything. Claire studied my face for a moment, then asked softly, "How do you feel about it?" I took a deep breath, letting the crisp evening air fill my lungs. I think it's too late for her regrets to matter. I've moved on, and I don't need her words to validate that. Claire smiled, squeezing my hand. That's because you've already found your peace. She was right. The letter didn't bring closure because I didn't need closure from Olivia. I had built a new life, one that wasn't defined by the pain she had caused. As I sat there, watching the stars come out, I thought about Olivia. I imagined her sitting in that childhood bedroom, surrounded by memories of who she used to be. Maybe she had finally learned the value of honesty, loyalty, and love. Or maybe she was just wallowing in self-pity. Either way, it wasn't my concern anymore. Olivia's downfall wasn't just about losing her home, her social status, or even Tyler. It was about losing herself. She had destroyed her life with her own choices, and she would have to live with that reality. As for me, I had no intention of looking back. The seasons were changing when Claire walked into my life. What had started as a friendship, a lifeline, really, had quietly grown into something more. I didn't notice it all at once. It was in the small moments. Her laughter filling the quiet of my home. The way her eyes lit up when I told her about my latest furniture project. The feeling of comfort that came with her presence. But it wasn't just Claire who brought healing. It was the life we were building together. Simple, honest, and free of the shadows that had loomed over me for so long. One afternoon, Claire and I were sitting on the porch, enjoying the crisp autumn air. She had a nervous energy about her, fidgeting with the hem of her sweater and glancing at me every so often. "What's on your mind?" I asked, setting down my coffee. She hesitated, then smiled softly. "I wasn't sure how to tell you this, but I went to the doctor last week." I frowned, concern flickering to life. "Is everything okay?" She nodded quickly, her smile widening. "More than okay. Marcus, I'm pregnant. With twins." For a moment, I just stared at her, the words sinking in. Pregnant. Twins. A wave of emotions crashed over me. Joy, disbelief, fear. "You're serious?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Claire nodded, her eyes glistening. "Completely serious." I pulled her into my arms, holding her tightly as a mix of laughter and tears escaped me. For so long, I had convinced myself that happiness like this wasn't in the cards for me. But Claire had proven me wrong. The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparation. We painted the spare room in my house, turning it into a nursery filled with soft colors and whimsical decorations. Claire's excitement was infectious, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of purpose beyond my own survival. As her belly grew, so did our bond. We spent evenings poring over parenting books, debating baby names, and imagining what life would be like with two little ones running around. "I hope they have your smile," Claire said one night as we lay in bed. "And I hope they have your kindness," I replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. It wasn't just the anticipation of becoming a father that brought me healing. It was the way Claire made me feel whole again. She didn't just fill the void Olivia had left. She helped me rebuild myself from the ground up. One afternoon, while I was working in my shop, Claire came in holding a small box. "I found this in the closet," she said, handing it to me. I opened the box to find the wedding rings Olivia and I had exchanged all those years ago. For a moment, I just stared at them, memories of that life flashing through my mind. "What do you want to do with them?" Claire asked gently. I didn't hesitate. "I think it's time to let them go." We drove to a nearby river, a quiet, peaceful spot we had discovered on one of our walks. Standing on the bank, I held the rings in my hand, their weight feeling heavier than it should. "Goodbye," I said softly, tossing them into the water. As they disappeared beneath the surface, I felt a weight lift from my chest. Claire slipped her hand into mine, her grip warm and steady. "You okay?" she asked. I turned to her, smiling. "Better than okay." That night, as we sat on the porch watching the stars, Claire rested her head on my shoulder. "Do you ever think about what might have been?" she asked. I thought about it for a moment, then shook my head. "No," I said, "because this, right here with you, is all I'll ever need." She smiled, her hand resting on her growing belly. Me too. For the first time in years, I felt at peace, not just with where I was, but with where I was headed. 5 years later, I found myself standing on the back porch of our home, watching the twins, Mia and Logan, chase each other across the yard. Their laughter filled the air, a sound that had become the soundtrack of my life. Claire stepped out, carrying 2 glasses of iced tea. She handed one to me, her hand brushing mine as she smiled. They never seem to run out of energy, do they? No, I said with a chuckle, but I wouldn't have it any other way. Life had a way of surprising me. After everything I'd been through, I never imagined I'd find myself here, happily married, raising 2 incredible children, and living a life filled with love and stability. Olivia had reached out once, about a year after the twins were born. I had been in the workshop when her email came through. Marcus, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but I wanted to reach out and say I'm sorry, again. I've thought about everything I did, everything I lost, and I know there's no way to undo the damage I caused. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to know that I regret everything. I hope you found happiness. You deserve it. Olivia. ***. I read the message twice before closing it. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Olivia's regrets were her own to bear, and I had no interest in reopening that chapter of my life. Tyler had reached out a few times as well, mostly to check in and ensure there were no hard feelings. I didn't hold a grudge against him anymore. Time and distance had softened my anger. He seemed to have moved on, building a quiet life of his own far from the chaos Olivia had brought into both of our lives. But those connections, those remnants of my old life, felt like echoes of a person I no longer was. Claire stepped closer, slipping her arm around my waist as we watched Mia and Logan. "What are you thinking about?" she asked softly. "Just how far we've come," I said, taking a sip of my tea. She smiled, resting her head on my shoulder. "You've built something incredible, Marcus. You should be proud of yourself." "I am," I admitted, "but I couldn't have done it without you." Claire shook her head. "You give me too much credit. All I did was show up. You did the hard part. You chose to keep going." Her words stayed with me. She was right in a way. The life we had now didn't come easily. It came from the choice to heal, to move forward, and to let go of the pain that had once defined me. That evening, as we tucked the twins into bed, Mia grabbed my hand. "Daddy," she said, her eyes wide, "will you tell us a story?" I smiled, sitting on the edge of her bed. "What kind of story?" "Something about you and Mommy," Logan chimed in from his bed. Claire laughed softly, leaning against the doorway. "You'll have to make it a good one," she teased. I thought for a moment, then began. Once upon a time, there was a man who thought his world had fallen apart. But then he met someone who helped him see that the best chapters of his life were still waiting to be written. As I spoke, I saw Claire's smile widen, her eyes shining with love. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, we sat together on the porch, the stars shining brightly overhead. "Do you think we're lucky?" Claire asked, her voice soft. "I don't think it's luck," I said, wrapping an arm around her. "I think it's choice. We chose each other, and we chose this life. That's what makes it so special." As I held her close, watching the sky, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. My journey had been filled with pain and betrayal, but it had also led me here, to a life I wouldn't trade for anything. The past no longer defined me. What mattered was the family I had built, the love I had found, and the peace I had worked so hard to achieve. And as the stars twinkled above us, I knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning of a story I was finally proud to call my own.